So welcome back to Coffee with the Editor. I am here at the International Railway Safety Council's conference here in Cape Town, hosted by the Railway Safety Regulator. I'm joined by Ron, and so we're going to hop, skip and jump, because the acronym for your company is HOP, and what does it stand for?
So HOP stands for Human Organisational Performance, which is an idea that we've got to look at not only the worker, but we've got to look at the organization and what's driving the behaviours of the workforce. So in the past, we called it human performance, and there was this focus on the worker. And so it's evolved to the concept of human and organizational performance, and have adopted pretty worldwide this concept. It falls out of the area of human factors research in human performance, which is where the term came from originally, and it's evolved into a science of its own based on a lot of history in different industries.
Okay, so obviously at this conference you're here and you're talking about rail specifically, so I think just contextualize the presentation you have given here at the event.
Yeah, so the presentation I gave yesterday was on the idea of how do we manage risk in a dynamic work environment, which is in the context of saying, so we've got the workforce dealing with a very high risk industry such as rail, and what I wanted to bring is the idea of how do we marry the concepts that we've already learned our lessons in the commercial nuclear industry, the Department of Energy and Department of Defense in the United States and Canada, and say, okay, how can we bring those lessons here so you don't have to reinvent that wheel, and hopefully help you progress in this improving this safety culture, get beyond the regulation mindset that regulation alone will solve our problems. Because in my world of work, I consider that the paper tiger. We can write as many regulations as we want, but we won't necessarily change the behavior unless we change the way workers think about work. So we start with changing the language and the words they use and the concepts they understand, so that everybody is foundationally grounded in the ideas of human organizational performance, which is grounded in the idea of what's driving human error, what's driving our behaviors, and how does the organization both locally and remotely affect those behaviors. So that's the idea, and then we're saying maybe I can bring some concepts here. I've written a recent book on the concept I talked about yesterday, which is called Critical Steps, which is a point in the process, a point of no return. That's the moment we start to transfer energy, move mass, or transmit critical information. And once we've done that, we can't go back. That genie's kind of out of the bottle. And if we've made a mistake before at that point, we're going to have an upset. We're going to have some kind of incident. So we look at that in its totality and try to break it down so that the workforce understands it. It sounds like a complex thing, but we try to simplify it, and we start with some very simple upfront understanding of human error, human fallibility in the workplace.
If I understand correctly, coming out of the nuclear industry, applying that into the rail, I think the problems are similar, like that human behavior is similar.
Yeah.
So how do we, in every industry, kind of address these challenges?
Yeah, so what we found is there were some challenges at the beginning. We had a watershed event in the nuclear industry called 3 Mile Island. Yeah. And with that, we said, okay, here's all the things we can do to fix the technical issues, the engineering issues. But what we realized is that we also got to address the human component here. Yeah. And so our industry reached out to experts worldwide in Europe and all around the United States and Canada and everywhere that was research in human factors to say, how do we understand human error and how do we start to address it, mitigate for it? Not just general understanding of it, great to know it, but what do we actually do about it? What are some practical solutions? And some of that comes from back when I was in the United States Nuclear Navy program. We did a lot of things with a high level of rigor and formality because we were dealing with high-risk stuff. Yeah. Like we couldn't afford that ship to not move through the water, that submarine to go underneath the water. So we've leveraged a lot of that information because a lot of commercial nuclear industry folks came from the United States Nuclear Navy program, and they brought that with them. So with that, we've adopted some of those processes and adapted them to industries. One of the things we don't believe there's a perfect fit for everybody. Yeah. We have to say what works for this industry, what makes sense for them to adopt. It's not the whole program. It's not every single error prevention mitigation strategy, but a variety of solutions tailored specifically to the needs of that industry. It's not a one-size-fits-all.
So you've traveled quite a bit,
yes,
if I understand correctly. And obviously looking at different railway operations, what for you is the most common issue?
So I believe the most common issue is that most people, frontline workers, have a misconception about what risk is. And that's actually what my talk was about yesterday. So in order to manage risk, we must understand it. We need to understand where it comes from. And if you take a task, any work activity, and you break it down into its elemental parts, the things that we have to do to accomplish that task, what we start to understand is that the level of risk varies, but there's a reason it varies. So what we did in our book and what we proposed to other folks, and it's been adopted pretty much worldwide in the nuclear industry and other industries, is this idea that we can take a look at that task and we can start to evaluate it and say, okay, where's that critical step? Where's that moment in time that's a point of no return? What are the important actions that set that up so that we have success? And what are just the administrative actions we take? So by breaking it down and actually being able to disseminate those different aspects, and we teach the workforce this, and truly when I say this isn't for a bunch of PhDs or scientists or managers, this is for the front line. So we speak in very common terms that they can relate to. So you have to make it relatable to the work they're doing, and you have to put it in the context of the type of work they do, or they're not going to listen to you.
But is it also about the right person for the right job? Because how I approach risk will be different to how you approach risk, or what you think of risk. If you think that's risky, I might not think it's risky at all.
So one of the things we're able to do with this program that we teach in Humanisational Performance is if I came in, and this is the first question I asked yesterday, if I had 20 people in the room, and we were about to go do this task, and I said, what's the most important thing? What's the riskiest thing we do? How many answers will we get? Well, the answer is at least 20, and if there's a safety engineer there, it's going to be 25 because he's going to have 5 things we should have considered. And I'm an old safety engineer, so I can tease these guys. But the reality is, there's not 20, there's 1. And we need to understand what that point is. And what we do by defining it and having a definition to it, we challenge them to say, is that really meet this definition? If the answer is no, then we're not on the same page. We all need to be on the same page before we go out to do work. And what we bring is everybody together along in that journey to understand that, and it becomes very commonplace. It's been so well adopted in the nuclear industry and Department of Defense and other areas that you don't have to rehash it because everybody understands it. So you start with some very fundamental training, and you build its building blocks, and you build a good foundation, and then we can start talking about now how do we mitigate for these human errors at that point of no return.
So coming from the Navy side, okay, so military and defense, there's a lot of discipline and structure around that, which I don't think is necessarily applied in other industry sectors.
That's a fact, yes.
So I think it again goes not just from the principle of the type of person, but also about embedding those lessons and disciplines that builds the culture, ultimately at the end of the day. But that takes a long time to embed.
Yeah, so what we found, and we were challenged with this quite often going to other industries, was that one, it's very costly, it's very time consuming. How do you train everybody? So we came up with a solution during COVID because we had nothing else to do.
Nothing else.
So I wrote a book and started another company. So what we did is to make it what we call scalable. And what we did is we said, okay, what are we currently teaching? What are the foundational building blocks of these concepts? And how do we break it into various training modules so that it's not a, feed you with a fire hose, then ask you which drops are important here, and you're soaking wet. You're like, I'm not sure. I've got too much information. Yes, exactly.
Okay.
So what we did is we built video-based training in modulated format, and we say to the company, okay, given what you do, what do you like that we have, and what can we do to do either a semi-custom or a full customization of that training content so it's in the context of your work? Because they don't want to see a nuclear operator doing this stuff. They want to see a train operator, a train mechanic, or a switchyard person. They want to see the same people doing the thing we're talking about.
Yeah.
So
we all think we're special.
Ma'am?
We all think we're special.
Oh yes, yeah. Just like Mom said. So what we try to do is offer that semi-custom. And if the corporation buys enough of our training, we basically say we're going to give you that customization for free. because we're trying to keep that cost down because we want to disseminate this information because we know it saves lives. And the industry is the most regulated industry in the world is nuclear. And if we can convince their regulators we're doing the right thing, trust me, we can convince anybody. And so that's why we believe we can help other industries. You know, the nuclear industries embrace this and they've done it for many years, but it doesn't, we don't want to come in and force fit it. We want to say, okay, what are you doing well already? And not throw the baby out with the bathwater and say, okay, how do we weave this into your processes to make them even better? Not to throw those processes out and bring some of that, maybe a little bit of rigor, a little bit of formality, and some knowledge around those things.
Okay, so having traveled, have you spent any time in terms of either South Africa or Africa's railways, or is this a new anomaly?
It's a new anomaly for me. Absolutely, it is. I'm looking forward to the field trips for the next couple of days. We are going to get some of that experience. So, but I've tried to talk to many people as possible here, and a common theme I'm hearing, and this is without polling people, was some of the biggest challenges is how do you get that frontline worker, the frontline workforce, to change their behaviors, regardless of all the regulation. How do we get them to do what we need them to do? Well, I suggest that they need to understand risk. So let me give you the example. If a small child walks up to a stove and the flame is on, if they're ignorant that the flame will burn them, what will they do when they see the blue flame?
Oh, they'll stick their fingers in.
They're going to put their fingers in. So we have to get that frontline worker. They're ignorant, just like I was, of this subject. They don't understand their own human fallibility, what drives them to make errors or make decisions. So we have to not only educate the frontline worker, but the supervisors, the managers, and the senior leaders of the organization. Everybody has to be on the same page. Yeah. And what we find to be the most sustainable element of that, no matter what it is you end up deciding you want to do, is you need to do good observation and coaching in the field, observing real workers. Yeah. Not looking at your safety statistics, which tell you almost nothing, in my opinion. Well, because
you might be popular for that.
Yes. And the reason I say that, if you look at major events that have occurred, quite often these companies have gotten big safety awards and the next day they kill a whole bunch of people and blow things up. And the reality is that safety award or their safety record had no bearing on the reality of their safety. What we really needed to be watching is the behaviors in the field. They're the telltale sign of where you're headed. Yes. And so we proposed that. So my colleague Ray Gonzalez wrote a book on this whole concept, and he's probably the best in North America on teaching observation and coaching. We have a whole series of courses on it to help the frontline workers better understand where their behaviors are out of alignment with the current standards and expectations. But if our supervisors and our managers can't give them that feedback in a constructive way, they come in looking for nails with a hammer, we're never going to change the behavior. We're going to get the stiff arm. We're going to go to break when they come to watch me. We have to change that.
So my last question, bringing this all together with a bit of technology, how do you see that working together?
To work with technology? Yeah, so there's a couple things. The training we bring brings an opportunity to bring what we call real-time data, and the real-time data comes from field observation. So if we immediately put that data into a database, and some of it's qualitative, some of it's quantitative, but we can analyze that data, especially very quickly today with AI and its ability to do big data analytics, and we can provide a dashboard that tells you where you are in the risk register and real risk related to behaviors. And so that's what we want to be able to do. We also provide some information about when workers actually prevent accidents. And what we have some very specific training that is so embraced by the other industries, and it's very simple, very straightforward, and you don't have to know any theory to be able to use it. It's called trigger training, where we see visible cues that something isn't right, and we stop, we get our supervisor involved, and we take an action before something bad happens. Because almost every accident, if you ask the person, well, I felt like something wasn't right. I saw this and I should have, and I felt like and they still move forward. So what we train them to do is recognize when they're in that space, take a stop, get the right people involved, make the decision, and prevent the accident. It's very powerful.
Thank you for joining me for this coffee with the editor.